Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome General Colin Powell. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you. You got to stay standing. Look at this crowd, you know?
Thank you.
First of all, thank you for being here with us.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for showing that video. Just the background on it, that video was shown to me the first time as I was receiving an award at Ellis Island from the Ellis Island Foundation. And they were celebrating the fact that the archives at Ellis Island now, you can look up just anybody who ever came to this country. And it was pretty moving to see it for the first time. And it makes a simple point that came from immigrants, the early pictures, my parents' passport, and then you once again end with family, because that's all there really is at the end of the day, family. It's the beginning and the end, and you go back.
Absolutely. Yeah. The General knows that our audience...
And the cool wedding picture. We like that.
Well, to Alma, your lovely wife of 51 years.
That was Birmingham, Alabama, in the height of the troubles in Birmingham. And shortly after that picture was taken, I went off to Vietnam, and all the trouble broke out in Birmingham. And my father-in-law used to guard her and our infant baby by then, and a year later, while I was in Vietnam, not knowing what was really going on in Birmingham. And we liked that wedding picture, and it was 51 years ago.
Wow, and she's a lovely, lovely, lovely woman. And we're going to talk about America's Promise in a little while, and Alma's actually the chair now.
She's the chair.
Yeah. Well, we want to talk about a lot of the important issues, not only for our country, but also for our young people. Mm-hmm. And as you know, this audience is comprised primarily of club professionals from the Boys and Girls Clubs. And so we want to talk about a lot of that. But something just hit me when I know how I've interviewed a lot of people, but I am so excited. I mean, unusually excited that you are here with us today. And I watched the audience and how they received you. And I know you travel all around the world. And you must be constantly besieged by people wanting your autograph, take a picture with you, to speak with you. And it all of a sudden occurred to me, what's it like being General Colin Powell?
There's another version of that question. They sometimes will ask my kids, what's it like having Colin Powell as your father? And my youngest daughter, Anne Marie, who's kind of the smart butt in the family.
But she's an actress and starring on Broadway, right?
No, that's the
was that Linda?
Wrong one. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Okay, Linda's on Broadway.
Anne Marie was an executive with the ESPN, and now she's home just taking care of her two little ones. But when she was younger, in college, she was forever being asked about, what was it like growing up with Colin Powell as your father? And her simple answer was, he wasn't Colin Powell then. You know, he was just daddy, and as far as they're concerned, I'm still daddy.
Good.
But I do get a lot of attention. I usually travel on commercial airplanes and go out in public, and I have a little baseball hat and some big round sunglasses. And
does it help?
No. Jacket. What it does, though, is it slows people down. They go like this, but by the time they go back, I'm gone. I keep moving. You have to move quickly, but perhaps the most embarrassing moment was the whole family. We all went to a vacation in the Caribbean last Christmas, and we were coming back through the Atlanta airport. You all know the Atlanta airport.
Nightmare.
And 11 of us are trying to get through the Atlanta airport, and so we are standing by an elevator, waiting to go on the elevator, and the door opens, and a German tourist couple comes out. And they kind of walk by me, but the gentleman does a double take. He recognizes me. And so the kids are all watching this, and I'm kind of, and the gentleman, after moving about 4 feet away, he says to his wife, Frida, you know who that was? That was General Schwarzkopf. And of course, my kids and grandkids totally broke up. They thought that was the funniest thing they've ever heard.
When you were growing up, did you ever think that you would achieve this success?
No. I hear this. This is a common question that I get. You know, gee,
God, every question I've asked you so far has been a common question.
well, there are very few questions I haven't heard over the last 50
okay, I'm going to sit here and think about it then.
But I get the question frequently, and it comes in the form of, gosh, when you were a young kid growing up in the South Bronx section of New York, did you ever dream that you could become chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff or Secretary of State or National Security Advisor? And so to have a little fun before answering the question, you know, yeah, there I was. I believe I was about 10 years old. And I was standing in the corner of 163rd and Kelly. And I said to myself one day, Self, you gonna grow up and become chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and Secretary. And then I get to the serious point that it was unthinkable. It was not conceivable in my mind and in my life at that time, in the early 40s, that, you know, young kid from that background, immigrant background, living in the Bronx, born in Harlem, with a modest education coming along through high school, could possibly have...
Modest as in you were a C student?
I was a C student steady. I'm very proud of that. I was a C student all the way through. And that opportunities would open up. Opportunities would open up in our society. And after I finished college, just barely, but finished college, got my ROTC commission, and went into the Army. And in 1958, the Army had now just fully desegregated a few years earlier, so I essentially had opportunities that did not exist before that. And the military was one of the most progressive social institutions in America at that time. We were practicing integration while the communities in which our posts were located were still segregated. And so I benefited from that, and I benefited from the simple test the Army gave me. Now listen, we know you came from an immigrant, poor, minority family, lived in the Bronx and all that stuff. But we don't care if you're black, blue, yellow, or anything else. The only thing we care about is, can you perform?
Was that the first time you had heard that from somebody?
As directly, when you hear it from the Army for the first time, it's pretty direct. And they made it clear that we've done away with all the barriers that used to exist to your kind of people, but you have to perform. And if you perform, you'll move up. If you don't perform, you won't. And it's as simple as that. Do you understand? Yes, sir, I understand. That's all I asked for. And I performed. And I performed against youngsters, young lieutenants who had gone to the best schools, who had gone to Princeton, Harvard, West Point. And I just kept working hard and studying hard, because I had to work harder and study harder than them because I came from a different background. But I had been raised in a family that said, you know, do well, don't embarrass us, have a sense of shame, have expectations for yourself, and always see what you could do to rise above where we are. Because all of my cousins were very successful as doctors and lawyers in this immigrant family of mine. And I was kind of the guy who, why did he go in the Army? Nobody goes in the Army. Is he ever coming out? The answer was no. And they worried about it. I finally got them to stop bugging me about it when I'd been in the Army about 10 years. And they said, you've been to Vietnam twice, you've been to Korea, this is getting scary, why are you doing this? And I said to my aunt, every family has a senior matriarchal aunt, the one who is in charge of all the other matriarchal members of the family. Well, they sigged her on me, Aunt Larice. And she said, when are you coming out? We're all very worried. And I said, but Larice, you do understand that I can retire at 20 years with a pension for life. Stay. Yeah. For poor immigrant families, a pension for life was like a magic phrase. And they put up with it. And then finally, the day I became Brigadier General, was promoted to General, my father had passed on, but my mother was at the ceremony in the Pentagon. She was just a little thing, about 5'2". And she's standing there with all these senior people and whatnot, and nice things are being said, and they're putting my stars on me, and they gave me a special pistol and a belt and all flag and all that stuff. And from then on in, she always went, my son, the General. You know?
Aren't very many moms that can say that.
No, well, there aren't. There are quite a few, though, but my mom, it was particularly special. But the point of all of this is that none of this would have happened if I had not had the right start in life, if I had not been protected, if I had not been given a belief system, if I had not had the generations of family experience passed on to me and made me responsible for carrying that family tradition forward.
But what about the kids that don't have a family like that?
They're in trouble.
But what can these professionals do to help them?
It's what these folks have done. It's why I became a member of the Board of Governors of the Boys and Girls Clubs of America, why I still visit them, why I spent a lot of time with the Boys and Girls Clubs of America while I was on the board, and even after I had to leave because I became Secretary of State, I've maintained my involvement. And America's Promise Alliance, which I founded, my wife now runs, focuses on the same things the Boys and Girls Clubs focus on, and that's why we've been such great partners for the last 15 years.
You have 5 promises.
5 promises. 1, every child needs responsible, caring, loving adults. Now, I've got a new book out. It's called It Worked for Me in Life and Leadership, HarperCollins, cheap on Amazon. Don't worry about it.
And they're for sale right outside the door, too.
But there's one chapter in there toward the end, and it says, the title of the chapter is The Gift of a Good Start. We argued about the title. I said, it's the gift of a good start. You have to give every child the gift of a good start. That good start includes the America's Promise pieces. Responsible, caring, loving adults. And if those loving adults are not in the family, not in the school, not on the play artist coaches or in church or a religious facility, then we have to come in. We have to make an intervention with that child through mentoring, through Boys and Girls Clubs, through Big Brothers and Big Sisters, through after-school programs, through faith-based program. You got to get in the lives of these children. And that's why I have been such a great supporter of Boys and Girls Clubs, because of what you do. I visited a club one day, and there was this old black gentleman sitting on a chair. And I just said hello to him, and I walked by. And as the kids were taking me around the club, oh, come over here, General. I asked one of them, well, who's that? That's Grandpappy. And I said, well, who is he really? He's a retired Army sergeant. Oh, okay. And so they took me around the club a little bit, and as I was leaving, I stopped by him again. And where were you, Sergeant? Where did you serve? And we talked a little bit about the Army. And I said, well, what are you doing here? He says, I come here every day. Well, what do you do? He said, I just sit. And you sit here all afternoon? Yes. And I watch. And if some boy's misbehaving or being ugly to another little boy, come here, boy. Or if some little girl has just got her feelings hurt and is crying, come here, honey, it's okay, give me some sugar. You know, and he's there every day. And the kids know him as Grandpappy. And he may be the only adult that they see on a constant, regular basis, day after day after day.
Especially a male adult.
Especially a male adult. There's another chapter in my book, which is going to get a little weird now, but stick with me. But there's another chapter in the book that's titled, We're Mammals. And I love watching Animal Planet and National Geographic. It keeps me from having to watch all the reality shows that we have in our cable channel. God, I'd like to ban them all. Do you know what some of those reality shows are doing to our children? Yeah? Yeah? To divert, it makes me crazy when I see these reality shows bring these dysfunctional, misanthropic, terrible, trashy people on television to lay out their funny little stupid problems.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
And the problem is,
and our kids are watching it.
These teenagers emulate that behavior.
Yeah, they're watching it. Or some shows, and I'm not mentioning any names because that would give them more attention, frankly. They wouldn't be mad. They'd be glad someone mentioned their nonsense. Or you get out there and these two people start arguing about some silly family or love issue, and then they scream a lot, and then with the bodyguards and the security people watching, they fight. That's how you resolve a problem. You get on a television show, you scream at each other, and at the appointed moment, you start fighting each other, pulling off wigs, slapping each other in the face, and carrying on. There are about 5 shows like that, and I think they are utterly disgraceful. The problems with them is people volunteer to show themselves off this way, and secondly, they make a lot of money, and third, we're watching it.
Why do you think they've become so popular?
They become so popular because, you know, we're into bread and circuses these days. We like this kind of nonsense. And I don't mind adults watching it because we can kind of sort it out as being, you know, reality television nonsense. But I don't like the fact that they're on in the middle of the afternoon and kids are watching it. because nobody is turning it off. Nobody's home to turn it off. And kids start to feel that this is the way things are done. And I find that very, very troubling.
How can we change that?
You've got to complain. One, stop watching them. That's what I do. Second, complain to the networks. Complain to your political leaders. Complain. Everybody keeps waiting for Superman to fix things. Superman's sitting in this room. We have to do it. It's not going to be any single politician, any general, any basketball player who's going to change the attitude. We got to change the attitude that exists with respect to some of the music our kids listen to. I heard, I got in the wrong station the other day, and I heard some hip hopper. I couldn't believe what he was saying. It wouldn't have happened in the old days, but now it's considered acceptable. And our youngsters find it acceptable, whereas they should find it disgraceful and degrading. But we've lost some of that, and we need to bring that back. So in the chapter in my book called We're Mammals, I simply describe how lions raise their cubs. Cubs are born, never leave the side of the mother. They're getting nurturing from their mother. They start learning their language from their mother. As they start to grow and want to go things, they want to learn, they want to move around, they can only go so far at a certain age. And if they go one step further than they're supposed to go, pow! Mama pops it with the paw, picks it up by the back of the neck and brings it in. And slowly but surely, the cubs are exposed to the aunts, to the aunts and the other members of the pride, and learns what it is to be a lion. And it's all by, they come with some instincts, the instincts to make noise when they're hungry and cold and hurting, but then they learn the language, they learn the habits of a lion. And big old daddy lion, the male lion with the big mane, is out there, just making noise. He's not really in this, but they look at him. They say, oh, that's the big guy. And they learn from him too, even though he's not in the nurturing. It's the mothers and the aunts who do the nurturing. And then finally, over time, when the lion picks up 30 generations, 1,000 generations of what it means to be a lion, after 2 years, I am a lion. I am a lion king, and the lion's turned loose. And I watch this with mice, with muskrats, with lions, with tigers. They all do it the same way. And I'm saying to myself, are we the only mammals who've forgotten what it is to raise people, raise children? And I fear that sometimes we are. Feel, we have to bring the child in the world, the baby daddy's gone off somewhere, is not in the child's life. The mother is really not up to the standards needed for the child to receive those earlier generations of experience. More and more grandmothers are responsible for children. When they should be sitting and enjoying children, they are the nurturers of the children. The children have to start being educated, not in school, but in the home. Child starts becoming educated when the mother is holding that child and cooing to the child, and the child finally recognizes at month 2 or 3, hey, that's my mom. I better learn her language and not only other noise I hear. And that's when education begins. And if that education doesn't begin properly, if the child isn't read to, if there isn't nurturing, if there isn't a sense of family, there isn't a pride of family members around to reinforce everything the child hears, then the child is going to have difficulty. The child enters first grade smiling and happy, a little backpack, just as happy as anyone else. But by the 2nd or 3rd grade, the child realizes, I don't read as well. I don't know these numbers as well. I don't know colors. I can't do that. I don't know how to mind my manners. Child realizes that he or she is behind. And by the 3rd grade, if that hasn't been corrected, it's an uphill battle. And it's that uphill battle that the Boys and Girls Clubs have to try to fight, because you get them a little bit past that age group. And you do such a marvelous job of correcting what hadn't been set in stone in the first place. And we have to teach our young people something that I was taught, and it was drilled into all of my cousins. It's a word we don't use anymore. Mind your manners. Mind your teachers. Mind. Don't talk. And okay, that's what lions learn, when to talk, when not to talk, and how to treat others with respect. And we're missing that. Watch 48 Hours, a show I do watch all the time, because I want to see how these murderers that they have on the show are caught. But what put them in that position? What caused them to be so degrading to other people that they would take life for almost no reason of another person? So we got our work cut out for us. And of all the organizations that I've worked with as a result of America's Promise and my own experience, of all the organizations I work for, none does it better than the Boys and Girls Clubs of America.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
They work hard every day with the kids that actually make it to a club. But one of the biggest problems, especially within the African American community, the overall population, blacks in America is about 14% now. So let's assume half of that is male, 7%,
Yeah.
probably not quite, but let's assume 7%. But our prison population, almost 50% are black males. I mean, that is ridiculous. What can we do to start there so that hopefully the kids will, this whole trend will change?
One of the things we're working on in America's Promise now is to make us a nation of graduates, to do everything possible to keep these kids in the educational system.
Education.
And get them out the other end. It's tragic that so many of our young black men are in jail, but they're in jail because they committed crimes. And they committed crimes because they either needed things that they couldn't otherwise buy, or they weren't raised properly. They weren't taught to behave properly. And some of the television shows that I do watch about crime and cops and 48 Hours, these folks seem not to understand the consequences of their actions.
Why is that?
They haven't been raised to understand the consequences of their action. They didn't get proper schooling. They didn't get proper raising in the home. And I was also on the board of Howard University, and it used to distress me so much because I was in charge of the academic excellence part of the university as a board member. But, and this is typical throughout not only the historically black schools, but all of our colleges. When you look at the African American students coming in, as I did at Howard, 67% or so of them are female, and 33% are male. You say, where are the boys? Well, the boys fell off the wagon somewhere earlier because temptation was too great, the temptation of sex, the temptation of drugs, and the temptation of, hey, I can have more fun on the street than I can have in the school. And so they get lost along the way. And those who do get to college graduate at a lower rate than the girls do. So you end up in our society, particularly I think in the Hispanic and in the African American community, with successful women who've gotten an education and can get into the workplace, but will have difficulty finding suitable mates. And when you see how many African American men are not available to be suitable mates anyway, they're in jail. Yeah. And so this is a sociological demographic problem that is going to affect African Americans and Hispanics.
Would you say education is the key? And we have a big deficit in our education system right now, and I know you're working hard to try to change that.
Education certainly is the key. We need better schools, we need better paid teachers, we need better facilities, and there's no question that we should invest in our schools and in our teachers and in the facilities that are within our schools. But I also firmly believe that education is just something you get in school. It's something you've got to start with from the home, and you've got to have it reinforced by the community, by the churches, by everybody else. You can't, there's too easy a temptation in our society now as everybody wants to talk about education. Well, let's study the schools, and let's have another conference on the schools. Let's study the schools. Whereas the problem really began in the home and in early childhood education. I'm glad the president has now made a priority of early childhood education, because if the home isn't able to do it, then early childhood education through Head Start, and there's a lot of criticism that Head Start really doesn't produce anything. That's nonsense. Head Start does produce something. It starts a kid on the right path to getting an education in the first grade. And if you don't get that child started well, you're in a problem. You're in a down hole. I am pleased to say that I went to the public school system. I never went to a private school in my life. And I went from kindergarten through college, and it cost my family nothing. There was no cost to it. The schools were pretty good. They weren't perfect. We had committed, dedicated teachers in the New York public school system then. And I popped out the other end. and they kept me in play. But the most important thing is to have schools that keep encouraging youngsters to keep moving. One of the things I picked up watching television was a school in Denver. It was a Cristo Rey High School, one of the great systems that we have in our country, Cristo Rey. And I visited Cristo Rey, and I'm associated with some of them. But I was watching this high school graduation ceremony, and the valedictorian was a Hispanic kid, and he had trouble, and he had come from a difficult home. And the interviewer was talking to him and saying, well, you know, you had trouble, but now you're the valedictorian of this class of 82, and all 82 are going to college. How did you do it? And he said, I was never, ever, ever given the opportunity to fail. They would not let me fail. They kept putting me back in play. My coaches, my priest, the priest in the school, the relatives that I have, they never gave me an opportunity to fail. And then he paused and he teared up and he said, and because of this, I have changed the history of my family. I'm the first one to graduate from high school. And now he's at Georgetown University in Washington, and we kind of keep up with him.
Wow.
But you got to teach kids that, you know, I'm sorry, you are too valuable. You're a creature of God. You've got a brain, you've got a healthy body, you've got everything that every other kid on earth is born with who is born healthy. And you can't waste that. We will not let you. The country can't afford to waste it. Therefore, you've got to stay in school. And you have got to be encouraged to stay in school by the people in your community, if not your family, by your religious leaders, by Boys and Girls Club mentors, by Big Brothers and Big Sisters, by 100 programs that we have. We know how to do it. What we have to do, and I think one of the things that Jim Clark is working on, is we have to scale it up. Both Ron and Jim, I think, will take the leadership on this, but I'm so proud. We went through about 15 or 1,600 clubs when we started America's Promise and worked initially with the Boys and Girls Clubs. You're up to now over 4,000. That's wonderful. You picked up all the military clubs. I think that's great. Let's hear it for the military clubs.
Yeah, and they're here.
Yeah, yeah. But 4,000 still isn't enough for the problem that we have. And so I hope that under your leadership and with all of the supporters that are here today and throughout this country, we can get this up to 4,000, to 6,000, to 8,000, to 10,000. The need is there, and the capacity in terms of people to do it, and the capacity in terms of money, it's there. It's there. It's just a matter of continuing to mobilize, continue to do what you're doing. The reason I fell so in love with Boys and Girls Clubs, as opposed to so many other things I could have done, is that when I joined the board in the mid-90s, you were up and running and functional, you had a policy, you had staff, you knew what you were doing. And this is the kind of organization that can scale up, and you've done wonderfully. But now it's time to scale up even higher. We need more clubs, we need more people.
There's one of the things that the Boys and Girls Club does, obviously, is stress education. And through the Youth of the Year program, this year, the National Youth of the Year is a fine young lady named Trey Dudley, and she's going to speak to the group in a little while about the importance of higher education.
Yeah.
and striving to that. The great thing about this book, and you say this in the foreword of the book, you don't have to read it from front to back. You can pick it up and read any chapter because it's a collection of stories.
Yeah, stories.
Through your life. Can you tell them about that and why you wrote this?
It's just 44 stories. No story is longer than about 6 pages. Many of the stories are 2 pages. And they're just things that occurred to me in the course of my life that I wrote down and turned into a book. There's no index. You can't look up anybody. And no story is connected to any other story. Corporate leaders are reading this book and using it at the highest corporate levels, but teenagers are reading the book because it's designed also for teenagers.
Rick and I have a son who's having some personal challenges right now, and he's in a place where he's getting the help he needs. This is the only book I mailed him. After I read it, it's just a phenomenal book for life lessons.
Yeah, and I'm telling you, I really was not a good kid. I didn't get in a lot of trouble, but I got in some trouble, but my grades were not great. And when I was writing my first book some years ago, I said, I wonder if I was as weak as I think I was. And so I wrote to the Board of Education of the city of New York and said, do you guys have my record? They did. And they sent me every report card from kindergarten through college. It was scary. I mean, this was in the pre-computer days when they filed all this stuff. And two things that struck out, they actually gave me a letter I had written. It was an essay that I was asked to write when I entered college at age 16 and a half. And it said, what kind of a person do you think you are? And I wrote a long page on what kind of person I thought I was. They gave that back to me 40-odd years later, and I was pretty much the person that I had described. So you really set yourself pretty much in stone by the time you're out of high school and entering the workplace or entering college. And if you look at what you say about yourself then dozens of years later, you're going to see pretty high correlation. The other thing that struck me is that I wanted to go to one of the great high schools in the Bronx. Bronx High School of Science, Stuyvesant. These were the elite schools. So at about age 13 or so, I went to my guidance counselor. And we sat down and we talked about it. And he didn't let me apply to one of those schools and didn't give me any encouragement. So I kind of walked away, said, no, whatever. And he wrote in the guidance counselor form, which I got 40 years later, young Powell wants to apply to the Bronx High School of Science. We recommend against it. That was crushing. I mean, I ended up at Morris High School, which is the place where they have to let you in. It's a high school of last resort. But I picked up a pretty good education, went on to CCNY, graduated with a 2.0, and they were happy to see me go. They said, he'll go and, give him to the government, we'll never see him again. And now I'm back at CCNY, and tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the morning, we're having a convocation at CCNY where we are announcing and celebrating and dedicating a brand new school within CCNY that will encompass 1/3 of the student body and 5 academic departments. And it's going to be called the Colin Powell School of Global and Civil Leadership. Now, I say this, I make this point because I don't want it to be about me, I want it to be about other kids. And what I say to kids after I tell this story, your past is not your present. Your present is not your future. You can overcome the obstacles that you're facing in your life now. There are people who are waiting to help you. They're in Boys and Girls Clubs. They're in YMCAs. They're in PAL programs. They're everywhere. There are people who are waiting to help you so that your past is your past and your present is brighter.
Well, you talked about
and
that.
Your future is
shouldn't
great.
dwell on your past.
Yeah.
Because no matter where you are in your life, you can still move forward. It doesn't matter where you started out, it matters where you end up.
I was speaking to a Japanese high school in Tokyo, a very upscale school. And after I'd finished my talk, they started asking me questions. And as usual, they had all the honor roll students on the right side of the audience. They're all reading questions that had been vetted by their teachers. And so I took about 2 of those, and then I just went to the students. Anybody else out there have a question? A young girl raised her hand, and about 16 years old, and she said, General, I'm afraid. I'm afraid. I fail at things, and I'm afraid. Are you ever afraid? Do you ever fail? And it's a pretty bold thing for a young Japanese girl to say among her classmates. And I said, yes, dear, I fail every day at something, and I'm afraid a lot. The question is not, are you afraid or are you going to fail, but what are you going to do about it? Fear and failing are essential parts of life. You aren't living life if you don't experience these problems. The question is, what do you do about it? How do you recognize fear and control it? And what techniques do you use? The first time I ever got shot at in combat, I was scared to death, but I had to keep going. I was a professional officer. And whenever I fail, I have a little process I go through. When I've really seen something go wrong, I try to analyze what I did wrong. I don't point fingers unless I have to take care of getting some people out of the way, but basically, I look at my own failure. What did I do wrong? And then I correct myself with what I have discovered in my analysis, and then I roll the failure up into a little ball, and I throw it over my shoulder, and I never look back. I never think about it again. I know too many people who want to tell you about something that happened to them 5 years ago that was terrible. I'm sure it was terrible, but that was 5 years ago. Always look through the front windshield of life. Don't spend time lingering on the side view mirrors and the rear view mirror, because you can't change anything. And so we've got to teach our youngsters to deal with failure, realizing it's normal, realizing that fear is a normal emotion. And we can't protect them too much. We can't be helicopter parent. You know, my grandchildren play on playgrounds in New York that, you know, they bounce on the rubber and whatnot, and, you know, it's very safe. Heck, when I was coming up, it was a monkey bar. You fell on your head, that's the way it was, you know?
Probably on a concrete base, too.
So a concrete base, steel poles and bolts sticking out.
I remember those. I went to public school also,
Yeah.
same ones.
And that's just the way it was. Now, I don't want to go back to those days, but at the same time, we have to expose our children early in life to failure so they can get used to it and figure out, this isn't the end of the world. You'll be okay tomorrow. So we can't overprotect our children. We've got to teach them that fear and failure are part of life, and here's how you deal with it, darling. And make them stronger when they grow up.
What about social media? Are you on Facebook or any of that?
I am on Facebook, and I had a Twitter account, but I don't use it anymore. I don't want to talk to all those people. And so
Do you actually respond to people when they write you on Facebook?
No. What's been interesting about Facebook is that I didn't have a Facebook account until one day I was talking to my grandson, my 17-year-old grandson. He says, "Oh yeah, you do have a Facebook account." I said, "I don't have a Facebook." He said, "Yes, you do. Somebody put you up."
I told Rick that. Rick
Yeah.
looked you up, and he goes,
Yeah.
"He has one." And
Rick
I said,
doesn't think I should have a Facebook account, but I do. But somebody had created a Facebook account in my name, and my picture was up there, bio was up there. He was answering questions as me. And so I said, "Oh my God, there's nothing left here. We have no privacy. So I'm going to fix this, by God. I'm going to sue. You can't take away my privacy. This kid Zuckerberg's got a lot of money. We're going to sue him and get some of his money." But then my grandson said to me, but Poppy, you already have 30,000 friends. Okay. We'll ride it, baby. We'll stick with it. And they're fans, not friends, because I couldn't possibly start corresponding with 30,000 friends. But it's interesting, sometimes a fan will pop up and my assistant will notice it or catch it, and it's somebody from my past who's trying to reconnect or tell me about something that's happened in the family. On those cases, we will separately take it aside and then answer it. But we were hacked about a month ago, and for about 3 hours, my Facebook account, Facebook page, was loaded with the nastiest things imaginable because this guy had gotten in. But after about 3 hours, my two assistants were busy killing the stuff, taking it down. It's all they did for 3 hours until Facebook got engaged and they shut it down. And so then the guy moved into my other Gmail accounts and started hacking. So I'm very much into the internet world. I used to be on the board of America Online when it first started out some years ago. So I'm into it. And at home, I'll have 2 or 3 computers running at any one time. My iPad's on, my cell phone's on, my smartphone's on. And I have to live on it. I have to live on it. But I'm now deciding that I've got to limit how much of this I do. I don't answer any of the requests to be linked with anybody else. I ignore all attempts to get me to expand my world. And sometimes Gmail gets on my nerves. And I'm a consultant to Google, so I'm not being evil here. But when I'm writing an email to say Rick, and suddenly Google tells me in the right-hand side of my screen, "Would you also like to send this to so-and-so and so-and-so and so?" I scream at it, "Mind your own business!" So you have to control this, and especially with your children. Because even my 5 and 7, my 6 and 8-year-old now, my 2 youngest grandchildren have their own iPads and Apple computers. And they're totally whizzes at it. But we got to be careful what they are doing and what they're seeing. and make sure it's used properly, and make sure they read books, not just tablets.
I think they've lost respect for their privacy, though. My son Nico is here in the audience, and he told me, he said, "Mom, you shouldn't have a Facebook account." And I said, "Well, I never go on it." He said, "But you should shut it down." And so they're starting to realize that they're losing their privacy, because every single thing you put in an email, on Facebook, on Twitter, is going to be there forever.
Yeah, and we found if it was just my personal, what I'm doing in my personal life, Facebook would not be of use to us. But we use it to respond to issues of the day. Mrs. Thatcher died. I put up a notice. I knew her very well for 30 years. Or when something like that happens and I feel a need to comment, then this is a superb way of doing it. And I have thousands of people who will come and pick it up, and the press will come and pick it up. Smartphones are just with us forever. And I keep telling all of my tech friends that the best device they have is an Easy Pass. I think it's the most brilliant thing that's ever been invented. Where you can, I can go up Jersey Turnpike at 70 miles an hour and never slow down, and they got me, They got how much money they got to take from me, an instantaneous transaction. And it kind of tracks with the new Square devices that you use in stores. So we're reaching the point now where the thing in your pocket, whatever it's called, smartphone, whatever is coming next, is going to be an instantaneous transaction device that will allow you to do anything you have to do in the world of commerce, and it'll be instantaneously, and all you have to do is wave it. That's starting to get a little scary, but you're not going to stop it. The thing that makes life hard for me are not the smartphones, it's the smartphone cameras. Because how many smartphone cameras are in the room?
How many are taking pictures of you right now? How about that?
No, this is it. But so when you're in public and you're going through an airport and you see people sort of starting to track you with their smartphones, and they start following you in the bathroom, you turn around and don't go in the bathroom. You keep going, find another one. And so it really is quite an invasion of privacy. And I wouldn't mind if it was just a snapshot to put in a family album, but it isn't. It's a snapshot that's going up there. And you don't know where it's going. You don't know how it's going to be photoshopped. You don't know what kind of caption's going under. Here I am with Colin Powell, my best friend that I've known for 40 years, You just saw the guy, So I have started to restrict that when it's possible. And I have also my family has started to restrict the places we go.
Isn't that sad?
As a measure of how many smartphones will be in place. Yeah,
it is
not
really
going to
sad.
change.
Yeah. Of great concern to all of the club professionals right now, especially because of Sandy Hook and the incident in Boston, is security. And I'm sure they have a lot of kids that are very concerned about their safety. What do you think can be done about that? And also, as a former military officer, how do you feel about the gun control debate that's taking place now?
Yeah, I have guns in my home. I've lived with guns for my whole life. But I think I'm a responsible person, and if the government wants me to register them, I'm ready to do it.
But do you have an AK-47 at home?
No, I don't have an AK-47. I have not found a need for an AK-47. But my own view is that the first and simplest thing that we should have done and could have done was to have people do background checks. Tell me what is wrong with somebody buying a gun that isn't willing to have a background check. Isn't willing to have a background check. And so from background checks, then you move to the size of magazines, 30-round magazines. You don't need them. And then finally, the most difficult issue is right now is assault weapons. If you want to fire an assault weapon, then go to a gun club or somewhere, take your assault weapon, go out and
But why even have them?
Because they make a lot of money for people.
Yeah, and that's the issue.
The NRA was willing to control a lot of this 20 years ago. They were willing to do things that now they find to be totally violative of the Constitution. And the Constitution they put the Second Amendment into the Constitution as a guard against our own government. That's true. And
Right.
it was a well-regulated militia, should not be abridged. But they sometimes forget the words well-regulated. And so let's well-regulate ourselves by asking people who want guns to do a background check. And shouldn't we be able to regulate some of the guns that are available to them? I don't see any reason not to, but you're not going to get it through Congress right now.
You don't think it will pass?
I think if they came back and really made a hard push on the background checks, you can get it. Maybe not right now. I think what we should have done was put the bill in 3 days after Sandy Point. Here, you just saw these kids get murdered, vote.
Right.
And we lost that window. The NRA and all the others got fired
Sure
up.
you don't want to be president?
No. Fortunately, I'm too old now.
No, you're not.
Oh, yes, I am. I'm much too old.
I asked some of the local Boys and Girls Club kids if they would like to submit some questions for you. So in the last few minutes, I want to ask you some of those. But first, I want to ask you, is there any question that nobody has ever asked you that's always up here thinking, is that person going to ask me this question?
Yeah, but I'm not going to tell you what they are.
Oh, come on. Just
No,
one.
no. Boxes of briefs? No, that's not.
I'll have somebody follow you in the bathroom. We'll find out. All right. So we asked several kids for questions, and some of them were really funny. A lot of political questions.
I get the best questions from young kids in elementary school.
I bet. What is the best question you ever got from a young kid?
An 8-year-old girl once, after I'd given a speech, she came up to me with her family and just looked up and she said, "How did you feel when your mother died?" And I thought, what is she really asking? And it occurred to me that what she was really asking was, somebody in my family has died recently, and I can't put in my mind what actually has happened and how it should feel. And so we talked our way through it. And her parents were there. And I think what she was really worried about was her mother might die. And so it's too scary to ask anybody in the family. So here's this stranger, this general who I'll never see again, I'll ask him.
But you were an intuitive adult that actually listened to her and answered her question.
You got to listen to kids. They got a lot to say.
Absolutely.
And they usually, they're uninhibited. They're uninhibited. They don't have the sort of barriers in their thinking that adults do. So that's why I love to talk to kids in elementary school.
Well, I do too, and I love some of these questions. Well, the first one is from Ralph Tillman. He's 13, and he's from the West Sanford branch. And he said, what was the best moment in your life?
That is a tough one, and the reason it's tough is because I never single out the best moment, the worst moment, the best thing, the worst thing, because I'm always then putting somebody else or something else in second place.
That's true.
So if I say it's the day I was married, then my kids will say, well, wasn't it the day I was born?
But without Alma, you couldn't have those kids.
Well, that's true.
They wouldn't be
They
there.
don't care. But so I avoid questions like that, and the answer I'll give is the answer I usually give, is that I'm a product of every good moment I had and every bad moment I had. And I gained as much and learned as much from the bad things that happened in my life as I did from the good things. So it's like calculus. I'm the area under the curve. I am everything that's ever happened to me. And so this is who I am, and I'm the product of 1,000 good things and 1,000 bad things. And I never try to single out which was the best. There were a lot of better things, but which was the best is too tough to answer.
That's an answer, though. Omar Warren, who is 12, said, if you could change anything in your life, what would it be?
I can't.
Okay, all right.
No, this question comes too. And I'm not ducking the question, it's just that I found it to be a much more healthy attitude and a more positive way to go through life without reflecting back on things that, I would change, I would do this differently, because I can't do anything differently. So I find that to be not a profitable use of time, to think about what you would have done differently in the past. You can write memoirs about it, but I can't do anything differently.
This next question, which is from Rasheen Lamar, who is 12, reminds me of the little girl asking you how you felt when your mom died. What do you think can be done to help kids feel safe in their neighborhoods? So I'm sure this child does not feel safe.
Constant reinforcement from parents and from caregivers and from the adults in the community that we're going to take care of you, we're going to protect you. You're a little afraid because of things that have been happening in other parts of the country. We'll do everything that we can to make sure it never happens here. So feel safe, feel secure. These things, unfortunately, do happen in society. They don't happen all the time, and they don't happen everywhere. So feel safe and keep reassuring the child that, you know, we're going to take care of you, we're going to be safe, we've got things at the school.
Great advice for everybody out here.
We have security at the school, yeah. Because, you know, the number of people who've been killed by terrorist activity since 9/11 doesn't even amount to, you know, 1 month's worth of traffic deaths. This is a part of life. Don't let it freeze you and make you so afraid that you can't go on with life. It almost happened to us as a nation after 9/11. When we were so panicky, we started shutting down people coming here, taking away their visas. No, you can't come here. I finally went to President Bush and said, Mr. President, we're more secure now, but we're now starting to not be America. We don't want people to come to send their kids to our great schools, or come to our hospitals, or come to Disney World and do the great things we have here. And if we do that, if we shut down, then the terrorists have won. We can't let them win. We got to open up and let people come here and invite them. And they're coming back now. They know this is a great place to come to. And if we ever lose that, then the terrorists won. And the point I make to many of my audiences, all my audiences, is that terrorism has not gone away. Somebody's going to get through and do something terrible to us, like we had in Boston. We get them, and we got these guys. We mourn, we rebuild, and then we move on with life. We have to make sure that there's one thing no terrorist can do. Not one, not 10, not 10,000. They can't be allowed to change who we are as an open, welcoming people. Because if they do that, they win. They ain't going to win.
I think we've run out of time. The General has another engagement. You've been in 4 cities in the last 24 hours, I think. So we need to wrap up, but I'm going to ask one last question, which I love, because this child's name is Tequila, okay? So her question is, Tequila Mahan, who is 15, how has life treated you up to this point?
Not bad. I've had a very wonderful life. I've started out a little slowly, but the Army was my career, and I succeeded in that career and in political and diplomatic life. I've had some really, really disappointing times, and I've had some things that have gone terribly wrong for me, but I am blessed with lots of friends who I've had all my life. I'm still in touch with my college and elementary school classmates, and I am blessed with a family that loves me and I love them, and they never see me as General Powell. I'm never General Powell at home. And
they can find you in front of the TV, it sounds like, though, right?
Yeah, one day when I was a brigadier general, we bought our new fatigues, you know, with the jungle pattern on it. It looks really cool. And I was all dressed up in my new fatigue uniform, and I came home and I walked in the door at Fort Carson, Kentucky, and my 12-year-old daughter at the time was laying on the floor watching television, and I walked in with my new camouflage uniform, and she looked up and looked at me and looked right back and shouted at Alma in the kitchen, "Mom, the G.I. Joe doll is home." And so that has pretty much kept me grounded. These 4 people, my 3 children and my wife and my in-law children, keep me pretty grounded. I don't get away with anything. And you really need that. I always say that, you know, there's kind of a little imaginary oxygen mask over my head. These people represent it. And whenever I'm getting a little too big for my britches, or I'm starting to, you know, look goofy, down it comes, and I have to take a deep breath and get back to being just daddy. And my life's been blessed because I've had a chance to serve my country, and I've had a chance to do things that benefited my country. And when it's all over, I just hope they say, you know, he's a good soldier, he did a good job, raised a good family, and God bless him. That's all I ask for. That's all you're going to get.
Well, we greatly appreciate General Powell being here. And we appreciate your openness and your honesty and sharing your opinions and your suggestions for them. And I hope you have safe travels today back up to the Northeast. And we hope to see you soon.
Thank you,
Thank
Susan.
you so
Thanks,
much.
everybody. Have a great conference.
Thank you. Wonderful. Great. Thank you.